here with us in this room at DigiConnect, and hello to those joining us online. Welcome to this DigiConnect seminar, which we've titled Securing Digital Sovereignty in the Digital Decade, Strategies for Europe's Tech Independence. This event will run through for a couple of hours. It's organized for and with the Digital Decade community, which some of you already follow. And it's part of our ongoing efforts to host and maintain open and forward-looking dialogues on how to best steer Europe's digital transformation in line with our core values and our strategic interests. So why are we organizing this seminar today? As you know, the EU is moving forward with the implementation of the Digital Decade Policy Programme, which, to recall, is our flagship roadmap to guide Europe's digital transition through 2030. And the question of digital sovereignty has over time moved from aspiration to necessity. We see the persistent rise of geopolitical tensions and our growing dependencies on foreign technologies and infrastructures. So in this context, Europe's technological dependence has become a pressing issue. And Europe has become, we notice its vulnerability in areas like semiconductors, cloud infrastructure, AI, and critical supply chains, putting our economic resilience at risk, but also challenging our ability to uphold our values and act autonomously in the global stage. So how do we go from ambition to implementation? That's the ambition for today's discussion. So the EU's tech sovereignty is a highly debated and complex concept. Is it German? Is it French? How does it divide political parties? All of this is good to debate philosophically, perhaps, but now it's been certainly elevated at executive vice president level with this new commission, and we're now talking tech in the EU more than ever. And you hear that a lot, that we're beyond urgency and that the time for action is now. So today we want to explore how the digital decade and the broader EU policy ecosystem can support a more coherent, better resourced, and strategically aligned action, to safeguard Europe's digital future. So we'll examine the strategic implications for Europe's digital dependencies, concrete proposals to boost resilience and strategic autonomy, and ways to align the digital decade with broader priorities like security, industrial, and geopolitical, as outlined in initiatives like the Eurostack. We'll hear about one of those initiatives today, specifically the project and report commissioned by the Bertelsmann Stiftung. And before we move eventually to our speakers today, I'd just like to remind you of a few housekeeping points. The session is being recorded and it will be made available on our Futurium and European Commission's YouTube channel. The slides will be shared after the event and they will be posted on Futurium as well. We welcome your questions throughout the workshop. As usual, from those joining online, we have the Slido application that you can access. So you're very much encouraged also to post your questions and comments on the event page on Futurium. Now let's turn to our program. The first part being about setting the policy context with colleagues here from DigiConnect, grounding us in the current state of play. We'll look at how the Digital Decade Policy Programme and the coming report are framing our long-term ambitions for a competitive, resilient, and sovereign Europe. We'll also hear how the Commission is acting on specific building blocks of sovereignty, from cloud infrastructure to open source technologies. And before we go through the agenda, I'll introduce the next parts later, but we have two excellent speakers with us today for the second and the third part, Professor Dr. Paul Timmers and Professor Dr. Francesca Bria. And thank you very much all for contributing today. Our first speaker is our head of unit at B2, Eric Petters. You will present how the Digital Decade Policy Programme serves not just as a coordination tool, but also as a call for European sovereignty and resilience. Thank you all for joining. The floor is yours, Eric.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, Manuel and Fabrizia, to join also this session, which is indeed part of a series of sessions through which we want to take stock on different aspects of the digital decade. And today's discussion on digital sovereignty is indeed very important. It is important because we have gone a long way since we were discussing the words and the definition of sovereignty to something which is closer to make it happen in reality. And no one expressed that better than our executive vice president in the quote in the next slide that you can see here, that is extracted from a speech that the EVP produced in the AI summit, in which clearly the EU is facing a situation where basically there is no choice except to gain on the sovereignty of our digital technologies. The good news being that we have a lot of assets on which we can build in order for making this sovereignty a reality. And this is also the second message that this quote on the strength of Europe and the political resolve that is being expressed in different documents and priorities for the European Commission. And one interesting element also of this quote is the fact that digital sovereignty cannot be addressed with a piecemeal approach. There is no way that we can accept to be weak at a certain point of the segment of sovereignty. We really need to have a comprehensive view and an overarching view in which we are linking not just resilience, but also competitiveness, our security, and also our values. And this is something that is very much echoing what we are trying to do in the digital decade. And the next slide is showing an extract of the key targets that we are focusing on. The Digital Decade Policy Program, which was established and adopted a couple of years ago, is including the objective of increasing Europe's sovereignty, but also it's having quantitative targets which enable us to really follow the different key direction in which we need to work on. There is no way that we are going to have sovereignty without skills, without infrastructures, without cloud and AI, without the HPCs that are engineering the data analytics that are needed for driving these technologies. There is no way that we are going to get sovereignty if we don't have resilient public services online. So this is really much what the digital decade is trying to do, which is to de-siloing our policy and making sure that we are having the broad picture. And we do that in a very concrete terms with a report that is published every year. Next time will be in mid-June, so in the margin of just before the Gdańsk summit organized by the Polish presidency. In this report, we are setting out the key challenges, the key trends that we are facing, but we are also monitoring the progress on whether the EU is and where member states are on the different aspects of digital ecosystem, from unicorns development to development of connectivity infrastructures, including submarine cables, space. So in a sense, we are giving a snapshot to Europeans and policymakers on the achievements that we have been doing over the last month, and also on the key challenges that we are facing. And we are not just doing an analysis, we are also producing a policy recommendation to member states. And the idea here is really to work together hand in hand with member states to try to establish the main priority action for cooperation, where we need to fund, where we need to invest, when we need to regulate or deregulate. So in a sense, to give a complete picture of the key actions and measures that can be undertaken by member states and by the EU as a whole in order for moving forward, in particular, in this objective of increasing our sovereignty, but also building a human-centered digital environment, and also being more competitive. So again, a comprehensive overview. So we had last year a series of key messages that I think are quite interesting in the current discussion on how we can, in practice, increase our sovereignty. I mean, first, I think we need to recognize that Europe has succeeded in developing a really specific agenda on digital, which is mixing competitiveness, investments, and values in a very different way from what our partners are doing. And this is something that we think can be a driving factor for giving the direction for more sovereign and resilient Europe. And then we also have the occasion through these reports to make the links between the different parts. There is, as I said, competitiveness needs to be seen together with resilience, together with the fact that we need to empower and protect people and society, that we need to protect our children, that we need also to fight disinformation, and that we need to leverage digital transformation in order for us to fight climate change. So in a sense, all this agenda is seen as a global one and a comprehensive one. However, there are a certain number of messages and conclusions that are directed more precisely towards sovereignty. In the next slide, you can see a series of analyses that is showing the dependencies that we are facing. I think the wake-up call that we have issued last year is still very much relevant on the share of services and technologies that are needed in Europe, digital transformation, but designed in third countries, on the importance and not enough importance of online platforms being European, on the fact that, you know, among the top ICT companies, only a minority is issued from and based in Europe. So in a sense, this wake-up call is also accompanied with the fact that we have a huge potential still to be used in terms of single market, that we need also to do much more to achieve our targets and objectives. I think there are some critical figures that show that in AI adoption, cloud, and in many areas, including skills, the EU is still punching below its weight. But among the sort of positive elements also that we have gathered, and including for the next report, and here I will sort of bridge and show a result that will be published in a few weeks. We have seen in the last Eurobarometer that was gathered a few weeks ago only, that 85% of European citizens consider important to ensure that European companies can grow and become European champions. So that's something that is also showing the very solid status of this attempt vis-à-vis our citizens. And then in the last few slides, I'd like maybe to also remember us that last year we issued recommendations specifically to member states and to us, which are very precise. So on the fact that we need really to earmark resources and take policy measures to adopt trustworthy and sovereign AI-enabled solutions. The fact also that for public services, for instance, in particular, we need to develop available, secure, and sovereign interoperable digital solutions for online public services. So again, to show that this analysis is also linked to policy recommendations. In the report that we are going to adopt in a few weeks' time now, we are going to assess how far we have been successful in driving those recommendations with member states. So, and again, we are ensuring some important follow-up to that. A last slide just to show and maybe to introduce what Manuel and Fabrizia will mention is again that, you know, the plan of the commission of this college is really to take this issue extremely seriously, and a few announcements have already been done before, in particular the launch of the Invest AI initiative and the approval and start operating of 7 AI factories. These are going to be really groundbreaking new element that will make a game-changing environment for our SMEs and for our companies to develop EU-based AI facilities. Of course, there is also the extremely positive success of the development of European high-performance computing. 10 years ago, Europe was nowhere but in the first top 20 of these computers. Now we have at least 3 out of the first 5. So in a sense, we know we can make it. It's just to find the capacity to extend this very positive outcome. And last but not least, sorry, of course, coming up, and here I think Manuel will dwell on it, the Cloud and AI Development Act, which will really be a game-changing element for building and equipping Europe with secure, modern, and sustainable infrastructure. So I will stop here, but just to say that with the digital decade, you have a framework and a governance mechanism that really can help steering this move towards a more resilient and a more sovereign Europe. And now we just need to see how we can do it in practice. Thank you very much. So, Eileen, the floor is yours back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. We are very happy to be joined today by two of our colleagues at DG Connect. I will give the floor now and the screen to my colleague Manuel Mateo Goye, who's the acting head of unit at Unit E2 for Cloud and Software. You will introduce us to your work, to the Commission's initiatives on cloud. So I will let you take the floor now. Thank you, Manuel.
Aline, thank you very much for your kind words. Eric, thanks a lot for the fantastic introduction. It saves me quite a bit of background that I usually give before speaking about the cloud situation in Europe and our forthcoming cloud policies. We work together very much with Fabrizia, and I'm very pleased that we do this together. And as well, that I see at least remotely two old acquaintances, Paul and Francesca. It's good to see you, if only online. The situation of the cloud in Europe in general is not good, and fits very much into the description that Eric just provided about heavy dependencies and a lack of sovereignty in this area. Let me walk you a little bit through the problem statement and how we see it on our end. The first thing to set a bit the figures and the minds is that cloud is something already big. It's becoming bigger. The figures you have in front of you from Schneider Electric is one of the many figures that we see out there, measured in gigawatt. As you see, at the moment, there's about a plus 50% happening across the world. You see as well that this is supported, but not only by AI workloads, meaning that the traditional cloud, the non-AI focused cloud, is as well a big part of it. You see as well on the bottom side of it that it's all type of cloud infrastructure. It's the big centralized infrastructure that is able to train the next AI, generative AI model. But it goes down to the very decentralized edge nodes capable of providing low latency, very quick reaction time, cloud solutions for example, autonomous driving. The figures on the lack of European capacity, and here I'm really thinking about the physical infrastructure that supports cloud, is alarming. This is a German graph issued at the beginning of the year by German federal government. You see that roughly, and studies and figures vary a bit here and there, but broadly speaking, Europe has today 1/3 of the American physical infrastructure to operate the cloud, and about half of the Chinese. And today, Europe is growing fast. If you speak to industrialists, they tell you that they're busy, and by busy, they mean they have signed contracts and actually physically building, doubling Europe's capacity by the end of the decade. But you see that growth is similar, if not bigger, in other regions of the world, and we cannot therefore take this sudden surge in Europe as sufficient to tackle our gap and our deficit. And when we speak to industry, the same problems keep on being voiced on and on again. Typically, it's access to energy and long permitting processes. This is by far the top two that we keep on hearing. But they face as well, in some places, access to water. Identifying sites is not easy. Permitting process, or rather the complexities of the local, regional, national systems are complicated. And in some cases, a limited access to capital. I'm saying in some because for the large companies that have deep pockets, this is less of a problem. But for smaller companies that are doing this more in a European startup mood, access to capital is an issue and forces them to lag behind more bigger, larger competitors. It's hard to speak about physical infrastructure, data centers, without speaking about energy. It's an important consumption of Europe's market of energy. The power demand is about 2.2%, probably a bit higher today, growing now very quickly after a couple of decades of being fairly stable. This is due to the fast rise in data center themselves, but it's as well because the good old data centers, which were not really data centers, the servers that were in the basements of companies without being professionally managed and which had very poor energy efficiency metrics, are being decommissioned one after the other, and they're now being progressively professionalized. But this increase in energy efficiency by professionalizing the handling of servers is coming to an end. There's an angle on research and development, which is very important. Europe is broadly stuck into three. There's three innovation that we want to unblock. First relates to energy. Again, if energy is scarce and more expensive in Europe, we want to be the most energy efficient in Europe. But as well, we want to break this paradigm that large AI models can only be trained in large centralized facilities, but where we can as well be able to use decentralized edge infrastructure to do that. And finally, and this is the closest to today's topic and to Eric's introduction, when you look not only at the physical infrastructure, but now as well at the cloud services, Professor Draghi, in his famous report last year, on an approach where we would at the same time develop infrastructure capacity, but at the same time carve an area for highly critical use cases to serve as an anchor business case to develop our own highly secure EU-based cloud capacity. A month and a half ago, the Cloud and AI Development Act was developed or was presented in a roughly page-long description in the context of the AI Continent Action Plan. Those are the 5 pillars. I'm not getting into them one by one out of time, but it fits into this first pillar that looks at the broader infrastructure question. Next to the AI factories and gigafactories, we'll look more at public investment in the case of AI factories or public support in the case of gigafactories to support rather, but not only public use of AI. And the Cloud and AI Development Act is more focused on helping out to unleash the private investment in this infrastructure. So 3 pillars, if you want to call them like this, against which we're working on, with 3 associated objectives. The first one is the one on research and to be the world leaders in the ideas that I mentioned a moment ago. The second pillar is to triple the capacity in the coming 5 to 7 years. So if industry is already doubling in the next 5 years, we want to essentially multiply by 2 the speed of that. But you remember that the gap with our international competitors is still widening, and we already know that by 2030, even if we triple, we won't be yet independent and autonomous in infrastructure capacity, and therefore this objective is already opens up to 2035 to be even bigger and will be precised in due time. And when it gets to the third pillar on autonomy, it's about creating the right conditions for our industry to be able to serve highly secure EU cloud-based capacity, again, for highly critical use cases. And we hope through that to not only create the market, but create a diversity in the services that are available to the public sector, to the private sector, and to the European economy in general. This is an act, so more of a legislative nature. It will be supported by a recommendation to member states and for their handling of cloud services in public administration, but this is slightly out of scope, so I'm leaving it out for right now. Maybe a word on the timing. The adoption of the act is publicly announced as last quarter of this year, first of next one. Me and my team were preparing for the most ambitious timing, and in due course, we will decide the exact date. But so this is roughly the time frame, and we're currently in the middle of public consultation and a call for evidence. It's running up till the 3rd of July, so you're still amply on time to look at it and dive into it. The public consultation is a classic tick box, and we try to make it as fluid as possible. But the call for evidence is really important. We're very much looking for evidence, reports, own analyses, and we can treat secure business information if this is what it takes. So with that, this was the 10 minutes part on cloud. Again, thank you very much, Eric, for giving us the occasion of presenting this to a wide audience. We're eager with my team to listen to any of you separately. And I'm now very glad to pass the floor to Fabrizia to speak about open source, which is as well part of our thinking, but she will speak about it way better than I could. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So my name is Fabrizia Benini. I am now going to talk to you about open source. Now, I think we all agree, listening to the previous speaker, that indeed one avenue to increase tech sovereignty in Europe is to increase the use that we make of open source software. Now, unlike proprietary software, it's a public good that can be freely used, modified, redistributed, and adapted, resulting obviously in greater control. Conversely, open source requires investment in communities of developers in testing and validation to verify the quality, reliability of the product, and sometimes costly adjustments to make sure that it is suited for companies' needs and to keep it sustainable over time. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. Now, just let me go through what we've done to support open source so far and what we think of doing in the coming future. Some of you may be familiar with the Next Generation Internet Initiative, the NGI. It was launched in 2018 under the previous MFF, and its goal was to empower users with a broad range of open source decentralized digital solutions. To achieve this, we provided financial support to grassroots projects covering all layers of the internet, ranging from open hardware, networking, transport technologies, firmware, operating systems, virtualization, electronic identities, middleware, decentralized ledgers, software productivity tools, and vertical applications. So quite a catalog. We mobilized over 140 million over 5 years, supported more than 1,000 projects, but above all, we constituted, brought to the fore, nourished, and continue nurturing a very good community of developers. NGI is delivering tools as we speak, allowing citizens and businesses to choose non-proprietary solutions that are alternative to big tech and to exert efficiently their rights enshrined in EU laws, for examples in the areas of privacy, consumer protection, and user choice in platforms. Examples are Mastodon, which you all know, Jitsi, a secure and open source video conference platform, WireGuard, a modern VPN technology. NGI's agile funding mechanism with cascading grants has accelerated innovation cycles and indeed ensured high quality, impactful outcomes with 83%. I think this is important to note, of recipients being first time beneficiaries of EU grants. This is an important notion. It's difficult to access EU funds. Cascading grants are very well suited for this type of beneficiary. This led to the mobilization of a very diverse pool of innovators, strengthened collaboration between academic institutions, entrepreneurs, SMEs, and fostered an inclusive, dynamic innovation ecosystem. We have facts and figures from a recent study by Gardner that shows exactly how this came about. Now, for the bad side of the experience. Despite these successes, we must be frank and say that there are substantial challenges in achieving scale and long-term sustainability. Supporting open source communities solely through a cutting-edge research and development program is not viable in the long run. Business models need to emerge to make sure that open source is an option for revenue generation. In absence of an integrated support framework, there is limited broad industrial adoption, market integration, or commercial viability of these innovations. And so these factors have constrained de facto NGI's potential to be transformational. Now let's take the wider view and see where we are as regards similar experiences. Open source software is estimated to contribute between 65 to 95 billion to the European Union's GDP. Open source software is today the basis of most software solutions, as you all know. And open source represents about 70% of all code. There are several promising startups in the EU. And, just to mention a few, Nextcloud, OpenNebula, Mastodon, and increasingly AI-related startups such as Mistral. Today, the international outlook is very different from what it was just a few months ago, actually. The average direct spending by the US administration on open software is 400 to 50 million a year, but it leverages open source technologies for critical infrastructure. China, needless to say, has got a 5-year plan that is particularly aggressive and incentivizes the reduction on reliance on foreign technologies as a strategic objective. India, as you all know, has the India OpenStack, and it leverages it into national digital strategies to foster innovation, reduce costs, and increase substantially its soft power. Mexico requires government software procurements to prioritize open source solutions. And in recent months, we also see movement in our EU member states. Open source for government use is gaining traction. Spain, Andalusia, Extremadura, and Barcelona have all implemented or are about to implement open source operating systems for the public administration. Some of you may have read the German coalition agreement. It prioritizes digital, sovereign, and ambitious agenda, which of course open source software is one of its key linchpins. The Netherlands and France have also actively been promoting open source technology for government use. So with that, I think we need to realize that whilst Europe annually spends between 10 and 24 billion of public funds on software, only a very minor fraction directly support European open source industry, which is primarily comprised of SMEs and startups, if not only individual developers. I would not say that that is a picture that does not call out for change. Now, historically, and we need to acknowledge that, open source software has faced challenges in reaching mainstream users, especially in customer-facing applications. We're talking about issues with usability, user experience, long-term maintenance, which have lagged in proprietary offers. Successful examples do exist. We are talking about Mozilla Firefox, the Apache Web Service, but many of these have been driven by very large, deep-pocketed US-based foundations like Mozilla or the Apache Software Foundation. Overall, European source software providers face substantial entry barriers, such as structural disadvantagement in procurement processes. This is due to the consolidated position of dominant players, alongside a lack of harmonized EU certification frameworks for interoperability, security, and legal compliance. They also face limited access to growth capital, and as many investors undervalue the community-based development models and struggle to scale up. We believe that to make the EU open source a real alternative, there needs to be a series of issues that we address, both horizontally and specifically. We need to raise awareness to the fact that they exist as alternative solutions. We need to position them in the EU ecosystem as providing conformity with EU legislation, addressing EU values, and facilitating, reducing the burden for SMEs or even larger companies to implement EU legislation. We have to address issues of deployment, usability, security, and to make sure that they contribute to take up. Particularly, we have to turn around the public sector and large customers to make sure that they are able to procure in all security open source solutions. Now, one way to address these shortcomings would be through the Open Internet Stack initiative. It builds on the NGI's innovation pipeline and focus also on the supply side of the open source market. It supports development, but also deployment, usability, sustainability, and market integration. It plans to offer a curated catalog of interoperable, EU-compliant digital building blocks that can serve public institutions, SMEs, and citizens. It will be based on 3 pillars. First, a modular library of open source digital building blocks with specifications, hardware, design, software, middleware design, data assets, and then tools across the computing continuum and the different digital stack layers. A second pillar, to ensure compliance by design, and to facilitate the availability of technical specifications, expertise, and intelligence for digital products. And thirdly, a third pillar, which would be a regulatory test bed to support the technical implementation of EU digital policies applicable to the spectrum of its assets. This means deployment of sandboxes and the provision of the interoperability as baseline objectives. The catalog of open source digital components is planned to cover identity, trust, decentralized platforms, cybersecurity, and interoperability. That is the legacy areas from NGI. Each component is deployable, should be deployable. I'm talking about the future because this does not exist yet. Should be deployable, compliant with the EU rules, and aligned with strategic use cases. The goal is to offer credible, trustworthy alternatives to proprietary platforms that are available, ready to use by public administrations, SMEs, and intermediaries that would then develop them and adapt them for the needs of other larger, perhaps, companies. Now, whilst we believe that this open internet stack would add structure, validation, and address some of the problems that we identified in the deployment and in the support to open source, we believe that there needs more that can be done. But for the immediate future, what we will do is that we will support this design through Horizon Europe. This is already planned earmarked for 2025 with 24 million, which would be establishing the building blocks and addressing the needs of the 3 Cs, because that's where we have found the demand to be strongest. And then in Horizon Europe 26-27, with just under 30 million to foresee the investment and the further expansion of the stack. Now, these amounts are small, obviously, in relation to what could be the potential of this type of project. But I think that it's a type of project that is modular, it's scalable, it is progressive. You don't need to deliver the whole internet stack on the first go. You can deliver it on a user demand basis. And also it is an initiative that it is synergetic with other initiatives that are ongoing, and we intend to build those bridges so that they are mutually reinforceable. One of them is the Digital Commons, EDIC, which is in preparation and to which two big member states are behind, France and Germany, along others. And they, of course, that EDIC has a very similar objective, which is to support open source communities and to deliver credible alternatives based on open source to the market. Now, they are already working on one that is very advanced, which some of you may know, which is the Open Desk and La Suite, which are alternatives to Microsoft, that are already in use in the French public service and I think also partly in Germany. There is the initiative that Manuel just referred to, of course, the Cloud and AI Development Initiative, which creates the potential for EU solutions for sovereign cloud, and above all has a marketplace where open source solutions can be referenced. There's the deployment of the wallet, which is another opportunity to stimulate EU sovereign solutions. But importantly, it's to flag also the initiative of Simple, which is an open source software developed by the Commission to operate data spaces. And again, relates very much to what Manuel was saying before. First released in December 2024, continuously improved since then. It is a part of the AI Continent Action Plan, and the Commission is committed to pursue its development. So with an overall budget of 156 million, Simple constitutes a major investment to boost data sharing through an open source common software. Besides in data spaces, Simple will also be used by member states to share their respective computing infrastructure through the Eurocloud initiative. Another area is AI, where there is significant potential for open source approaches to accelerate innovation, enhance competition, especially for SMEs. I think I would stop here because I could continue, but suffice to say that in the context of the Gen AI for EU initiative, there is the idea to boost the development of AI made in Europe, where the European Commission has significantly stepped up its efforts to support the development of AI models with open source. And indeed, in the context of the AI for public good and the Gen AI for Africa, the European Commission develops advanced AI models and platforms to tackle critical challenges such as climate change and others. So as the EVP said in her confirmation hearing, I will work towards equipping the EU with this open internet stack because it is a collection of open services and platforms, and that is one of our strengths. So with those clear indications, it's only up to us to deliver. With your input and collaboration, I'm sure we can listen to your suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabrizia and Manuel and Eric, heads of units are acting for B2, E2 and E3. We have received a few questions on Slido, but in the interest of time, we will make sure to respond to those questions in writing later. So I understand you will have a busy summer ahead with the consultation results to deal with for E2. So thanks for the very informative contributions, both of you. As you can see, the topic is very much at heart of this building's work. We saw earlier that the issue of a sovereign Europe, digitally, technologically sovereign Europe is at the heart of the Digital Decade Policy Program and this mandate's priorities. And that's an idea also that's very much at the heart of this initiative mentioned also by Fabrizia, the Eurostack. So that brings us to the second part of our seminar to deepen the discussion and frame the strategic debate. And now we're very happy to welcome our next two speakers, the first one being Professor Dr. Paul Timmers, who's a leading expert on digital sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Among the many affiliations that you have, Paul, is you're visiting professor at KU Leuven and also a research fellow at the think tank CER, also a former director at the European Commission. So you will help us connect some of the dots. For those who are not familiar with the Eurostack, I suppose you will now become a bit more knowledgeable on the issue today. It did appear in the German coalition agreement, and it's pretty much grounded in the belief that we need to choose to go European and de-risk or face the risk of remaining or becoming, depending on perspectives, a digital colony. And some people oppose the idea. Some say that too many ships have sailed. But today we're really looking forward to your perspective, Paul, and your recommendations also on how to translate a strategy into actionable policy and what it will take for Europe to move beyond urgency to effective coordinated delivery. So thank you very much, Professor Timmers. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eileen and colleagues. It's a pleasure and an honor to be at this Connect University together with Francesca and, of course, with my former colleagues at DG Connect. I will try to share my screen. Eileen, you can perhaps say if it works properly when I show this. Let me see. I'll put it in presentation mode. Hopefully that works. Yeah. Do you see full screen digital sovereignty, if it is correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, works. So we are talking about sovereignty, and sovereignty has, of course, to do with the structure of the states, the countries, and their relationships. So this is a bit more taking a step back. And what about this relationship, these international relations? How does that relate to technology? What does that tell us about who controls the digital stack, and what does that mean in policy terms? And I'll give some recommendations and then move over to Francesca. So international relations, there are many different ways that we can understand the changes that are happening right now. And today, this is every day in the news, especially because, of course, the actions of President Trump, but also because of the war of Russia against Ukraine, the actions from China, the threats that we are seeing. And some people are saying you have to look at this from the psychological view, the personality of these leaders. It's almost as if policy development today not only needs to have the technical people, the lawyers, the economists, but also perhaps some psychiatrists. Well, that's perhaps one way to look at it. And then sometimes if you see that, you think it's sometimes a somewhat erratic behavior. Is that the whole explanation? Probably it's not. I mean, there's also a sociological background to it about the values that people aspire and subscribe to, whether or not you respect, for example, unity in diversity, just to mention a value, fundamental rights as we have them high in our flag in Europe. And others are saying, no, this is much more about economic power. You have to understand these changes from who is driving the economy globally, who's has the upper hand in developing the AI economy, for example, that counts. Who is the most productive, who has this competitiveness internationally. And finally, of course, you can look at it from a geopolitical point of view. Which country is kind of on top? What are the relationships between these countries in terms of power? And I would argue we probably need to have all of these four perspectives in mind, also when we are talking about our targeted initiatives, such as, for example, Eurostack, such as, for example, the policy of the European institutions of Europe. So generally, what we see is characterized these international relations by geopolitization, weaponization, and the rise of authoritarianism. So geopolitization, this is a diagram of trade policy interventions running only until 2022. But then already you saw the huge rise of the number of policy interventions, and the red part are the protectionist policies and interventions. So they are mostly on the rise, and worse actually just now in the last few months and years. So that's the geopolitical use of the economy. You see also the alignment between companies and governments, big tech. And here, the big tech leaders in the United States, all at the inauguration of Trump, and we see this pattern being repeated all the time. And there is this combination of the big tech kind of dominating the stack, grabbing the stack, and this also being possibly weaponized by governments that have their own aspirations. And this may be in the US, but the same story we know also from China, this kind of alignment. Let's not forget that. And then finally, you see that this materializes in things like trade and technology wars, like the US-China war around chips, and that is impacting not only US and China, but also very much Europe. We all know about, for example, the export controls that are limiting and conditioning the business that a European company like ASML can do in the chips business. So geopolitization, weaponization, and also the rise of authoritarianism. So in fact, in terms of authoritarianism, we see that this is really about putting things in a black and white scheme, them against us. Not a very nuanced debate. You are either in favor or against. You are either reading the left press or the other press, that type of thing. And of course, reality is not at all like that. It's about instrumentalizing institutions, not respecting the rule of law, misinformation, disinformation, suppression of opposition and free press and free academic work. You see these kind of things happening. And that is on the rise. Democracy is in retreat. When we look at it from a more kind of international relations, political sciences perspective, if you talk about geopolitics, there are several schools. Some are saying, well, there's more than states. We have relationships between states, but we also have international institutions, isn't it? We have a United Nations, we have a World Trade Organization, we have a European Union, and we can work together in that. So there's more than only the sovereignty of the states. There's also something that goes beyond that. There's the constructivist view that says there's a high past dependencies. These relationships between states depend on history and what is being constructed bilaterally and multilaterally, and the various kind of tools that we have around that, such as, for example, standardization organizations. So that's a much more contingent type of perspective. And then you have realism that essentially says states are always at war with each other. And the view of realism, hard power, is winning the day nowadays. Then in economic terms, well, we have had neoliberalism, which had the promise of bringing progress for everybody that didn't live up to its promise. And nowadays you see much more economic nationalism, the promotion of your own industry. And actually there are also respected international economists like Danny Roderick that are saying there is a good thing in economic nationalism, at least if it is about protecting or helping your nascent, your young, your green industry that is coming up, and then making them subsequently really compete in the open global marketplace, because that's the only way you can be successful. But they don't need to be killed right away when they are still young. And then in this combination of geopolitics and economics, which is geoeconomics, while we have had globalization, as a matter of fact, now we are much more talking about economic security, protecting your supply chains, the resilience that comes with that, and even the weaponization, the use of that. So giving a few examples of that, well, I will come back to a few examples, is while we see these big pictures, you may also wonder, you know, today in the press, every day there's something happening. Is it these individuals that are acting, or are there persistent belief systems behind it? And I think there are. So Putin, Russia, the super presidential system, that's coming clearly from a historic revisionist point of view. Russia can go back 1,000 years in history and recreate great Russia. At least that is a kind of an excuse that is being put forward. In China, we see historic materialism, which in essence says that the political system will win that is best economically. So it's materialist based, and that explains also the huge emphasis on production and productive competitiveness from China. And even in the United States, where it might seem more erratic, I would say read up Project 2025, which has a lot of systematic material that explains where they are coming from. What are the long-term persistent belief systems? And that's constitutional originalism, which says, let's go back to the Constitution, and those kind of values and ideas that were present in the Constitution have to be reinstated and reinforced, which is restore the family as the centerpiece of society, dismantle the administrative state, defend the nation's sovereignty by all means, and secure the God-given rights of the individual. And I leave that last line open and invite you to think about it. What do you think is the persistent belief system for Europe? And what is our governance? And what is our leadership then in Europe? So think about it. We'll come back to that in a minute. Do we have anything like that? Now, strategic autonomy then, and we talk about digital sovereignty. I prefer actually to use the term digital strategic autonomy or digital autonomy. I think describes it a bit better, but let's talk about it. What is this then actually? Well, one thing that we can say is that already since a number of years, it's becoming evident that European sovereignty is at risk. And you just heard all these presentations. They actually also say European sovereignty is at risk. But when this was put on the table in around 2017 by Merkel, which was at that time inspired by Trump, stating that he was not sure about continuing to support NATO, Merkel said we have to know that we have to fight for our future and our fate ourselves as Europeans. And of course, no one listened to her. That was mostly defense-oriented. Macron made it much wider, and he talked about strategic autonomy and also actually European sovereignty for all of economy, society, and democracy. And of course, no one listened to him in 2017. Then we got Juncker, who had the State of the Union speech in 2018, of which the subtitle was, "The hour of European sovereignty has come." Well, half of the European press fell over him and lambasted him and said, "Thou shalt not talk about European sovereignty. It's a forbidden word." And other people brought that in a different way and said, we should not be naive. Rutte said, Europe has to become streetwise in 2019. And then 2022, Scholz, Bundeskanzler then, had a speech in Prague, and 1/3 of the speech was about European sovereignty, and the title of that was also European sovereignty, and no one criticized him. So European sovereignty has become accepted, and we now have to wonder, what is it that how do we look at European sovereignty today? And I think in the European Union, we have this new assertiveness and new uncertainties. European sovereignty, we cannot talk about it, but what do we do with it? What do we build upon it? What can we be confident about, and what are the new uncertainties? As said, the German government now explicitly talks about European sovereignty. So what is sovereignty? There is a lot of theory around it. Basically, there are three elements to it. It's territorial. It's of course about the country, the land, the borders, and those kind of things. But today we also say it's territorial in the sense of data. So that is what belongs to us. Take your health data. They belong to you or your country, isn't it? They do not belong to some kind of tech company, isn't it? So it's part of your sovereignty, of your sovereign assets. It's institutional. How do you organize the state? Geopolitical, do you believe in democracy and those kind of things? Contested nowadays. And it's foundational. It's the power distribution between the government and the citizens, expressed in Europe in democracy, but increasingly, as I said, we see authoritarianism coming up. Sovereignty also needs that the state recognizes the citizens and the citizens recognizes the state. So there's a legitimacy there, and you need to be recognized as a country, as a state, vis-a-vis foreign states, which is clearly not the case. Russia does not want to recognize the sovereignty of Ukraine. The question is, does the rest of the world recognize the sovereignty of the European Union? Yes or no? And I would say that if you go back to those earlier three philosophies, all of them actually do not recognize European sovereignty. Or perhaps even stronger, they may think of destroying European sovereignty. Sovereignty is nice talking about sovereignty, but you also have to do something, you have to be able to do something, and that's strategic autonomy. That is the ability to decide and act on the future in our economy, society, and democracy. So it's about ability. And ability you can express in terms of your capabilities, your capacities, and control. Capabilities is what you know. You need to understand the cloud technology. You need to understand Internet of Things or quantum technologies. You need to have people who are good at that. The citizens need to be able to use it. You need to have capacities. That is, you need to have enough people who can understand it. You need to have enough factories, enough fabs, these AI factories, enough of them. And to control, you need to be able to have something to say about it. If it is all foreign owned nowadays, you know, there is an issue with control. So the 3 Cs. This, by the way, is terminology that comes from the military sector. They think in these kind of terms: capabilities, capacities, and control. So this is a very operational definition that you can start measuring. Let me skip this part, but move to what is then the relation between sovereignty and digital strategic autonomy? Well, as I said, sovereignty is built by having strategic autonomy, control, capacities, and capabilities. And you can think about it, what is this then in the digital world? So you can map that onto the digital stack, and I'm sure that Francesca will say more about it, because this is actually a picture, the layered stack from the Eurostack report, which says that at the bottom we have the inputs like raw materials, energy and water, actually also talent, chips, on top of that networks, Internet of Things, cloud, software and data, and artificial intelligence. So a layered description, and you may then wonder if this is what you need to measure capabilities, capacities, and control against. Who controls the digital stack? Thinking about this will be answered in a minute, but digital strategic autonomy is really about this link between geopolitics and technology. And you have to, it's useful to think in terms of these structures, like the stack, or actually the way also this technology is built up. Is it centralized or not? Is it more distributed? And that makes a difference for these international relations. And do not forget, international relations are about power. It's increasingly about realist hard power. Some examples is indeed this question of who controls the digital stack. And as Eric said previously, 80% of the digital stack is actually controlled by foreigners, is important from foreign countries. But let's take another example, the International Financial Transaction System that manages all the financial transactions between banks internationally, is a system that is essentially centralized, because these transactions go through one central system. There you can see, are they terrorist transactions? Are they transactions from Iran? Are they transactions that come from banks that are under sanctions, Russian banks? And so if you control the centralized system, you have power. And that's, in fact, how this system works. There's a governance that corresponds with that. That's geopolitics. Blockchain and Bitcoin is quite the opposite, you would say, because that's very distributed, very hard to control. So no wonder that those that are interested in controlling it try to seek some entry point in it, limit how distributed this is. So they do not full distributed blockchain, or they try to get as many Bitcoins as possible, which is what the reserve does. So you have to think in these structural terms. That's useful to do. And this we can also think about in artificial intelligence. And if there's a US-China global leadership battle, which is a power struggle, technology will be structured according to that power structure. And conversely, how we structure AI will determine this global leadership battle and the role also of Europe. And an open question is then, of course, that I leave to you is, what about quantum technologies? Is that then a technology that has a structure that lends itself for exercising these geopolitical power battles? Or is it like the United Nations says, 2025 is the year of quantum, quantum is for humanity. So very briefly then, if we go to EU policy, does policy actually respond to these kind of developments? Well, there's a lot of recent EU policy around the competitiveness compass, in the defense, rearm Europe, internal security, protect the EU, the preparedness union initiative, and also sectoral initiatives like automotive and steel. And of course, the debate that Eric and others also pointed to, the revision of the digital decade. So does that actually respond to these kind of geopolitical challenges and to the urge or the pressure to create more sovereignty? And I think to some extent it does, but it's not always made coherently clear. And therefore, I will get to some recommendations. And I think actually Eurostack is an example that does make it much more clear how you create, because that's why it's called an alternative for digital sovereignty that really responds to the sovereignty question. And of course, at the national level, you see things also happening now, like the German government saying in the Coalitionsvertrag, strategische soevereiniteit, they talk about digital sovereignty, they also talk about. So some high-level recommendations, but if you want to have more detail, I would urge you to look up Eurostack or also the Weltwert website that makes very specific recommendations for the digital decade. But let me start at the highest level. So you remember there are these three kind of philosophies or belief systems. So what about the EU? What about Europe? What is our persistent belief system? And I would say probably it's European cooperation. And although this is coming from European cooperation from no more war, I recently hear people talking about a European dream, meaning Europe is the place where you actually want to be if you want to be free, if you want to have diversity, if you want to be able to exercise your opportunities, even though there are limitations and all of that. So it's a more positive vision on that. And by the way, there's a very funny, interesting article in The Economist also about that. Europe is not that bad after all. Then we have the EU treaties and institutions that are the basis in governance and leadership. Well, you may wonder, is this leadership? Is this sufficient leadership, 27 plus EU? But anyway, I think the recommendation is go back to the EU foundations, guard the EU foundations. This is our strength. And therefore, that in our perspective comes back in the Eurostack, should come back also and continue to be the foundation of digital decade. But also being very practical, do these strategic autonomies assessments. So write down, what are your capabilities? What are your capacities? What is your control? And do that for each individual item, for example, in the stack or your European solutions. Tell, does your policy contribute to European sovereignty? Yes or no? Does your project contribute to it? When you buy solutions, does it contribute to European sovereignty or not? Is it an improvement of strategic autonomy? And this is, you can do this very operational. It has already been said, synergistic policy, but by that I mean a bit more than what has been mentioned so far. So I'm always struck, for example, that if we do a policy, we seem to be much internally oriented, rather than saying, let's take a quantum policy or an open source policy or alternative edge cloud solutions, that we also use these internationally, actively. When we do quantum capability building with our international partners, we should not be shy to say, and we have very good European solutions. Here they are. So that's synergy. Clear the barriers in the internal market before you do actually have the technology development. So do a horizon program and think already about clearing the barriers in the internal market. That's synergistic policy. And finally, from urgency to agency. Now is the time to act and not to talk that much more, even though I do it too, but we have to act. And I think we also need to be honest, this will not be without pain. No pain, no gain. There will be, when we choose other solutions, perhaps reduced functionality in certain instances, perhaps more cost, perhaps not everybody will be liking us, but this message also has to be given because there are greater interests here at stake. Let me stop at that. That's again, repeat more detailed recommendations you will get in a minute, I think, and also can read elsewhere. So thank you very much. I stop sharing it and I hand back to Eileen, I think.
Indeed. I hope that you can see my screen, but perhaps it's not quite. Oh. There's an issue with my screen. Now, yeah. All good, just bear with me. So, yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Sorry for this glitch. That was very, very inspiring, very refreshing, taking us out literally and figuratively out of our building. So you've very much expanded our analysis and our perspective on digital sovereignty. So I think for the moment, we don't have necessarily questions that can be directed just at you. So what I propose is that we take them all at the end, so that we can have a nice transition to our final speaker today, which I'm very happy to introduce. Going from vision to discussing infrastructure, we have with us today Professor Dr. Francesca Bria, whom you know very well. She co-authored with you, Paul, the same Eurostack report, and she's an influential voice on digital innovation and governance. Although she needs no introduction, Francesca Bria is an innovation economist, digital policy expert, a fellow at Stiftung Mercator, and a professor at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose in London. So what we will hear from her is the strategic vision behind the Eurostack proposal, which is this roadmap that many of you have heard of, for building a sovereign European digital stack across 7 technology layers. And also what we will welcome from you, Francesca, is your remarks could perhaps complement what you've heard from Professor Timmer's perspective on how we can regain control of our digital infrastructure, not just in rhetoric, but also in practice. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'll let you now take the floor and the screen, and then we can interact with you both towards the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see my presentation. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So first of all, let me thank DG Connect for this opportunity and for the conversation that I found, of course, very relevant and very inspiring until now. So I will dive into the Eurostack report and the Eurostack initiative. Let me just say that the Eurostack initiative is an initiative that started backed by a multi-party group and coalition in the European Parliament, key European member states, and is backed at the moment by more than 200 European industries, and increasing, I would say, it has the interest and support from across Europe, but also, I have to say, globally. And of course, this is now proposing an analysis of the situation and some political and policy action that should be put into motion in Europe in a fast, I would say, fast and a very decisive way. But at the moment, of course, let me dive into the analysis. What we have been doing with the Eurostack report that you find in the website with all the information and visualization is almost a political analysis of digital sovereignty or digital strategic autonomy. And the reason why we have been looking at it from a encompassing, I would say, and comprehensive perspective is that today we find, of course, as you heard already, our economy, democracy, and security that are increasingly dependent on digital infrastructures that we neither build or control. So Europe finds itself navigating a world where technology is no longer neutral. It is the new arena of a geopolitical competition, as Paul just laid out very clearly, and we are dangerously exposed. The examples are in front of our eyes, from ASML, that is caught in the US and China chip war, which, by the way, is increasing. We have seen yesterday a new export control policy coming out of the US, which is even going deeper into supply chain fragmentation, to Ukraine's reliance on Starlink satellites. If Elon Musk decides to shut down Starlink, Ukraine will go in the dark, to the sabotage of undersea cables in the Mediterranean Sea and in the North Sea. Our digital backbone is under threat. These aren't just technical gaps or economic risks, they are strategic vulnerability. As we know, the global order is shifting, and this is why, we also put a lot of effort into make a comprehensive analysis looking at the entire stack, which can be also represented as a global supply chain, because the United States is currently weaponizing tech dominance, tying artificial intelligence to export control chips and hyperscale cloud monopolies under programs like Stargate. China, meanwhile, advances a state-led digital Silk Road, embedding its stack that ranges from chips, cloud, and artificial intelligence across global value chains at speed and scale, which is unimaginable from a European perspective. So Europe cannot afford to watch from the sideline. The window to act is closing fast. And let me stress this point. We cannot regulate what we don't own. We cannot defend what we don't control. And we cannot build digital sovereignty on critical dependencies. That's why in the Eurostack report, we make this very clear that it is time now to invest decisively in Europe's digital foundation, what we call the Eurostack. Our autonomy depends on it. If you look at this Europe innovation gap at this chart, many of you is familiar with this number. Europe innovation gap is clear. And by the way, it was already analyzed in Professor Draghi's report. Some examples, just 7 billion of euros went into AI startups last year versus over 30 billion in the US just in the last few months. 80% of global compute is controlled by a handful of US and Chinese players, while Europe accounts for less than 4% of AI training runs. I just picked some numbers, but of course, this isn't looking very good from a European perspective. This is not just about investment, it's about control. The artificial intelligence race is about the whole stack, the chips, the compute, energy, water, critical raw materials, cloud, and data. I would say the artificial intelligence is actually redefining the whole stack from the ground up. The US ties it to defense, China drives it with industrial policy, while Europe remains fragmented and dependent. If we don't need to join, that is, I think, the clear message also of this AI supremacy race chart that you may study more in depth by looking at the report. We don't need to join someone else's race. We need to innovate in our own terms. And the Eurostack is the strategy we put forward to treat digital infrastructure as a strategic asset, to invest in public interest stack, and align innovation with our democratic values. Not to catch up, but to build a different future in European terms. Digital infrastructure is the new essential service. It's our digital nervous system, like electricity or water. It powers everything from government, healthcare, industry, and smart cities. Without sovereign control over compute chips, digital ID, payments, data, cloud infrastructure, we risk handing our future to foreign powers. And I'm afraid the window to act is rapidly closing. Let me start by showing you, actually, I had a very nice, this is an animated, amazing stack. We have to quote Dirma Johnson, a great designer for this visualization. You can see it online. We're making a 3D model of the stack because they asked us for the Triennale of Architecture in Lisbon. We've just been presenting it at the Biennale of Architecture in Venice, where people were really amazed by looking at what we have defined the architecture of modern power. So consider some of the facts. If you look at raw materials, every microchip, battery, and satellite start with essential raw materials: lithium, cobalt, rare earths. Yet China controls 60 to 80% of rare earth production, while Russia wields its energy resources at geopolitical leverage. If we move at the chips layer, Europe's share in global semiconductor production has gone just to 9%, while we consume more than 20% of chips production. Our reliance on US design giants and Asian manufacturing powerhouses like Samsung and TSMC undermines our strategic autonomy. Even ASML, as I said before, our crown jewel in lithography, is entangled in these power struggles. If we move up to the connectivity and Internet of Things layer, our digital networks are the nerves of modern society. When crisis hits, as I said before, as in Ukraine, we find ourselves scrambling for access to foreign systems like Starlink. By the way, this is a critical vulnerability in Europe, and possibly Starlink should not be given access to secure satellite communication in the continent. While our own projects, such as IRIS², lag dangerously behind. If we move at the layer of cloud and software, with nearly 70% of the cloud market dominated by US giants, and our software running on proprietary platform beyond our control. Actually, the software layer, and I was very pleased by the presentation given by DG Connect before, is really alarming. More than 90% of the software we use, of course, like also including the operating systems in our mobile phone that is about access to data and services, is controlled by maybe one company, mostly, which is Microsoft. So Europe's digital independence is compromised at these two layers, the cloud and software. If we move up to the AI and data, probably this is where the power, geopolitical power rivalry has been redefined now, because as we said before, the artificial intelligence is becoming this interface between organization and citizens, between states and citizens, between corporations and citizens. And although if we look at the physical infrastructure part, our research and supercomputing centers, the Euro HPCs, are world-class now, we are failing to translate these trends into scalable, mission-critical AI solutions. In an era where data and intelligence define power, also here, Europe risks being left behind. So this is why we propose to look at the stack as a radical blueprint on how to regain European digital sovereignty. And this is really a proposition, of course, mainly for the European Commission and Europe, the European Union, as a bold integrated initiative to build an independent European technological stack. Because today's fragmented efforts, a CHIPS Act here, a cloud initiative there, aren't sufficient. We need a pan-European industrial strategy that aligns every layer of our digital ecosystem, from raw materials and chips production to connectivity, cloud, software, and artificial intelligence. And this doesn't mean that Europe will have independence in every layer of the stack, but certainly that we're going to aim to reduce our vulnerability, starting exactly from a power analysis of the stack to see where our vulnerability risks compromising our national security, industrial competitiveness, and the democratic model of Europe. So from materials to chip, we must secure strategic alliances with resource-rich nations, invest in recycling technologies, and establish critical stockpiles. Simultaneously, we must double down our strengths in automotive, industrial, and healthcare chipset by creating pan-European foundries backed by a robust sovereign tech fund. If we look at connectivity and IoT, our digital networks must be secured and more resilient. Our ports, grids, and cities depend on thousands of connected sensors and platforms. So accelerating projects like IRIS² or developing Open RAN and secure 6G networks seem to be paramount for Europe. And enforcing a bi-European policy for critical infrastructure will enable us to better protect our grids, ports, and factories from vulnerabilities. At the cloud and software layer, Europe must break free, as we already said, from the grip of a few US cloud giants by building a sovereign federated cloud environment that prioritizes data sovereignty and sustainability. We must also cultivate open source software ecosystem, as we heard before, much more aggressively, to free ourselves from proprietary lock-in that strangle our public sector, for example. And in AI and data, our supercomputing and research excellence must be cultivated and harnessed in the AI factories framework, which is a good step forward, Centers that not only lead in technological innovation, but also drive interdisciplinary AI and deep tech research, investment, and innovation, and linked to industrial capacity in healthcare, biotech, climate science, green cities, and more, all governed, of course, by an ethical framework. Our AI factories, I believe, in order to succeed, will need a pan-European digital industrial policy. And I stress the industrial part because we need the uptake from European industrial champions and the creation of the new champions of the future. So if you look at what we define as Europe's common digital services, by the way, some of the key building blocks were already mentioned in all the Commission presentation. Europe doesn't just need more technology, it needs the right kind of technology built for its people, for the values, for the future. That's what the Eurostack is all about, a shared digital foundation, secure, open, and democratic. So if we want to see even some priorities, of course, this should be the next stage of the Eurostack implementation. Prioritize, focus the investment, see where we have quick wins, see where our strengths lie, see where we have more capacity, and start there. For example, building interoperable cyber-secure platforms for AI diffusion. The sovereign cloud, I think this is really a strategic priority. Key components, which of course is going to be tied to key components such as the digital ID wallet rollout, data access, and the digital euro. By the way, the digital euro, given the situation with the Federal Reserve at the moment in the US and the stable coin, the diffusion of cryptocurrency becomes a key priority for Europe financial stability. So critical infrastructure investment will include energy efficient public computing capacity and next generation chips to drive AI development across key sectors. I was just in Spain right now as part of the AI International Council led by the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, and there was a blackout not far like last week in Spain. And if we look at the energy, the energy and water consumption of especially the new wave of AI infrastructure built out across Europe, our energy grid won't be able to sustain this if we are not planning well, if we are not moving to energy efficient public computing capacity and solving a lot of the issues that were mentioned, by the way, in the AI and cloud presentation done by the European Commission before. And we have proposed some examples on how to demonstrate the value of the Eurostack, because of course, critical infrastructure is key, but we need to demonstrate the value for our public needs and the strengthening of our European industry. So it is necessary to develop and diffuse made in Europe tech products and platforms with design and development, but also scalable digital services that include areas such as citizen services, advanced manufacturing, precision medicine, or climate tech that are really relevant and necessary for Europe. So we are basically proposing to grow and scale these digital services, but tie them to the European backbone, which is the Eurostack. We're also proposing clear principles for the Eurostack development. So I fear that many people are just saying you should not just, replicate Silicon Valley or replicate the Chinese model. Of course, we can learn a lot from both Silicon Valley and the Chinese development model, but we need core European principles. And of course, the Commission has the digital rights charter. So our principles are very aligned with that. Sovereignty and security, infrastructure must be under European control, openness and interoperability, no monopolies, no lock-in, climate alignment, systems must be energy efficient and resilient, data should be seen as a common good, and innovation much respects rights and society, more decentralization combining central capacity with local autonomy, inclusive governance, transparent, democratic, and accountable, and democracy first. So we believe technology must empower people and not weaken public institutions. Let me just also say that this strategy is not isolationism. It is strategic resilience. And the good news is that, of course, we have a lot of capabilities. We have assets. We don't start from nowhere. And Europe is often praised for its ability to regulate, but doubted when it comes to building. But the history showed that technological sovereignty comes with bold national strategy and long-term public and private investments. If we look at South Korea, India, China, all they have built their digital strengths this way, and Europe can do the same. We have amazing asset. We have a world-class industry, cutting-edge research, and thriving ecosystem in AI, cloud, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. I'm just showing you some, of course, of the companies, the key networks. If you go in the Eurostack report, we also started to map it geographically. Where are the data centers? Where are the satellite launches? Where are the fabrication facilities for microchip? Where are the design centers for fabs? And so on. So we started also to create really a taxonomy and a map of Europe digital industrial strength and capacity. And from Barcelona to Leuven, Silicon Saxony, Sofia Antipolis to Scandinavia, we do have talent and infrastructure. So if we see what Paul said about the capabilities, capacity, and control, I think this is the kind of industrial map that we have to look at and go deeper to see where we start, where we focus our resources. So what we lack, we believe, is not capability. What we lack is the collective political will to act fast and to scale. And if Europe fails to act now, we won't be securing our digital sovereignty. We'll be ruled by systems we don't control, under rules we didn't write, and powers we can't hold accountable. So we really think that the time to build is now. And let me go quickly into some of the proposed action for a sovereign digital Europe that you find in the report. The first one is to have mission-oriented investment. And the investment part was already mentioned, but the investment gap is really big in Europe. So bold investment is essential in our view. In response to the US 500 billion Stargate program and China's AI dominance, President von der Leyen launched a 200 billion Invest AI initiative, where 20 billion, I think, are already earmarked for giga AI factories. But if we have 10 billion powering supercomputing research and public-private partnerships around the AI factories, we want to be sure how this money is spent. In the Eurostack report, we call for a 300 billion European sovereign tech fund over the next decade. We think this is feasible. This is money that Europe has, which is going to be sourced from EU, national, private, and philanthropic capital. This fund will fill the investment gaps, protect strategic firms, and innovate and drive innovation. Because part of the Eurostack can be funded by critical infrastructure, but part of it, of course, is innovation. And we need to ensure that Europe long-term competitiveness and independence is a goal. The second point is that we are saying that you should have a Eurostack open challenge approach, for example. So hit the ground fast. Don't wait to build the whole infrastructure from the ground up. And this could be by beginning to shape a 10 billion Eurostack fund for demonstrators anchored to critical Eurostack component. For example, MVPs in AI-driven biotech, smart manufacturing, robotics, mobility, or healthcare, which is the AI diffusion strategy. If I'm not wrong, the Commission just been published something about that today. Selecting the best ideas through a Eurostack challenge could be done by national innovation agencies across the continent. And this project should demonstrate Europe's capacity to innovate across industrial sector. Number three, of course, that Europe must lead in ethical, open source, and sustainable technologies. So we prioritize data sovereignty, green innovation, and transparency. The green by design we find particularly important, focus on renewable energy, water efficiency, responsible data governance, and then supporting a vibrant open source ecosystem that's rooted in European values. But also we, as a fourth action, we don't underestimate the importance to lead the next frontier technologies like edge computing, quantum, industrial AI, biotech, or space technology to secure a future-proof competitive edge. And here the rearm possibility of Europe must be the focus, because of course with rearm Europe, we should make sure that there is investment in creating technological and scientific capabilities, in particular because we know that cybersecurity, LLMs, all the kind of AI, drones, and so on. This is used as a dual-use technology, and building European capabilities, or even a European DARPA to scale these capabilities, could be a very concrete goal. And then finally, the Buy European Act we've been proposing, and this could be also a focus of something we could do together with the Commission. So adopt a Buy European strategy for public cloud services and critical infrastructure using a comply or explain rule. For instance, by 2030, we say to aim for 50% of public cloud spending to go to EU-based providers. This means also that governments should commit around 500 million annually for 5 to 7 years spending, supported by clear guidelines for GDPR compliant, energy efficient EU solutions. So sorry, I kind of wrapped it up and compressed a lot of information in a short amount of time. But let me just finalize my presentation saying that the Eurostack is more than a tech initiative. It is a declaration of European strategic autonomy and European dynamism, a bold step forward, a digital future rooted in democracy, transparency, and human dignity. It is an offer to the entire world. It is not a protectionist strategy. And above all, it's about defending democracy. Because while we delay, tech oligarchs rewrite rules, controlling platforms, spreading disinformation, and capturing the digital public sphere. If platforms like X can interfere in elections, fines are not enough. Europe must build credible alternatives. This is not just industrial policy, it's national security. We must forge a third way, made in Europe infrastructure, platforms, and products that reflect our values: diversity, resilience, sustainability, and freedom. This is Europe's moment. If not now, when? So this is really a call to break free from dependency and build a sovereign digital Europe that's resilient, that's competitive, and democratic by design. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca. Now it's the turn for you both actually to answer some of the many questions we received through Slido. So I have made a selection of them. Hopefully we can use the last 20 minutes to get started on what we've got. So a first question which seemed interesting was about whether you could think of a way to measure digital sovereignty. It's a complex phenomenon, one of the participants writes. So could you perhaps help us think of a way to measure it with a quantitative indicator in order to monitor the progress of the EU and the member states the way we do with the other indicators in the Digital Decade Policy Program, and how that could be helpful also to compare the EU and member states to other countries like US and China. That's one first question. Perhaps you'd like to start, Paul, I understand.
Let me take that question. Very good question. So digital sovereignty or strategic autonomy is actually not so complex. Sovereignty is a difficult notion. But sovereignty as being that you can decide about your own future, in economy, society, and democracy. What you need to have for that, as I try to explain, is that you need to know things, you need to be capable, you need to have enough capacity so that you can actually deliver servers, computers, fabs, talented people, and you need to have decision power. And this you can ask at each individual solution. And as a matter of fact, we are working on a way that technical solutions can actually be put to this test. They can be asked these questions. but this should also hold for policy. And what you're actually asking is, do you contribute to sovereignty? And it's a bit strange that when we develop public policy, we do impact assessments. We actually never ask the question, so is this a public policy that is good for sovereignty or not? And the reason for that, you might think about it, but the treaties, actually, the European treaties do not mention sovereignty, although it's all about sovereignty. It's all about pooled and shared sovereignty. But nowadays we can talk about sovereignty, so we can ask, does this contribute to sovereignty? And then I think the more important question is, where do you still have risks for your sovereignty? So we could indicate, list, and possibly also measure what are the remaining risks, and are we reducing these risks over time? And that's, of course, also partially a political assessment. I mean, also Eurostec is not an initiative that says this is all protectionist. This is only about Europe doing only its things. You can very well work together with like-minded partners that are not threatening your sovereignty. So that's not a risk. But there are likely remaining risks. And as said, today the risks are like 80%. And 20% is the non-risk area. So we can start listing to what extent our risks are decreasing. Now, in fact, a bit more work needs to happen to develop properly these questions on capacities, capabilities, and control, to start using them, hopefully in a uniform way. But it's not rocket science. So yes.
Thank you, Paul. Francesca, would you like to react to this question?
No, that's good.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have quite a few others actually. Riku is asking, should Europe have something similar to a Nasdaq stock market? In the US, it provides a platform for companies to raise capital by issuing shares to the public through an initial public offering. Currently, the situation is fragmented in Europe, he comments. So the question is, should Europe have something similar to Nasdaq stock market? Any of you both interested in picking this one up?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. I think this is part of the Capital Market Union finalization that was also very clear in the Draghi report. And I think this is a space where we're going to take action as Europe. We need a public market. We need that. We have seen that 30% of our most talented, startups and scale-ups, in particular in the growth phase, after we have invested a lot of public and private capital in these companies, are then bought and acquired by foreign players, being them foreign VC funds or VC funds of big tech companies. So this is very well tracked. I mean, with some clear, also very famous names like, ARM and others. So we know the problem. And yes, I think we have to increase our growth fund capacity, maybe create a bigger European deep tech growth fund. I think this could really very much help at the innovation level and scale the capabilities of the future industrial champions of Europe. So this is one part, and obviously the public market, I think, should be a part of that if we want to capitalize and keep the wealth and also the talent and the competence here in Europe. So yes, I think this is an important part, but just to be aware that this has to go hand in hand with the stack, because basically that's why we emphasize so much the critical infrastructure part, because you may be betting on these future champions, but if you don't anchor them in helping developing the critical infrastructural components of the European stack, then you may lose the capabilities. So this is exactly what, for example, big tech VCs do. They buy, for example, NVIDIA. It's very clear their strategy. They buy and acquire a lot of companies, a lot of European talented companies, but then they link their equity investment into the mandate for these companies to build on their own infrastructure and to use their own chips, proprietary chips. So we need to start to have this kind of strategy to combine the VC investment and risk capital investment, equity investment, risk equity investment at the pan-European level, but also anchor this equity investment into the sovereign stack. I think this is something we are lagging behind. We haven't done much in the past. And also, of course, mobilizing the industrial champions of Europe, which are actually well positioned on lower level of the stack, like telecoms, like, you know, other industrial champions, like even the defense manufacturers and so on.
Thank you very much. I actually have two questions for you specifically, Francesca. So I think you might be interested in keeping the floor for a bit. Do you believe that current EU policies based on grants to support R&D and innovation are sufficient or insufficient to address the challenges of power in the digital age? And then another question is about the role of cybersecurity in your model, because one participant thinks it looks a little bit forgotten. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe the first one I take, the second I give to Paul, which is an expert in the subject matter. No, we are very clear that the grant model, it's very good for fundamental research. So we advocate to have strong investment in fundamental research in Europe. Actually, the deep tech European capability is growing, and I think we have to keep investing in deep tech and creation, and in fundamental research, but this is certainly not enough, and we make that very clear. But in this respect, Europe is not still. I mean, we have created the European Innovation Council, which I think it's a very good tool that needs to be expanded in this phase. AI Invest, I guess it goes in the same direction of blended finance. So, you know, partly to keep the kind of grant approach, but also use a lot of other instruments, in particular, as I said already, grow risk-taking equity across Europe. So, I mean, there is no doubt there. So I think that one of the problems that we have is that, yes, some of these initiatives that are some of the most important initiatives, for example, project of European interest in cloud or in the chips and so on, they're still kind of research level. And we need to push the research out of the research space into the market. And I think this is a gap that's very clear in Europe. So we are excelling in research, but we really struggle to transform this research in platform products, you know, things that scale, because we need adoption. I mean, if you look at, we need, you know, diffusion, we need adoption. And if you look at the DeepSeek example in AI, I think this is great. I mean, Europe should learn from what has been done abroad in a very clever way, using less resources, using very talented young, you know, engineering capabilities, but also open source solution to scale. I mean, you making your vulnerabilities something that you can build on top to do it differently. That's the story of DeepSeek. So we should do something similar in critical areas, but certainly we can't only do large R&D projects. We need different instruments to exactly, you know, create this market. By the way, public procurement, we believe, is a very important part of that, because if you are, as a state, committing, you know, to shape the market, not only, you know, act when the market is you know, failing, but shape the market towards the needs that you see in your industrial ecosystem, then you can, you know, create more certainty for the providers that are developing sovereign solutions. For example, the sovereign cloud. We see public procurement in a kind of bi-European perspective, a part, I mean, a component of these different instruments that need to be laid out to have success cases.
Thank you,
Let
Francesca.
me take the question on cyber.
Yes, cybersecurity.
Yeah?
You
So
will.
cybersecurity. Yeah, so if you read the Eurostat report, you see that we have, of course, these layers, and they are all analyzed, but there is also a number of topics that are cutting across the layers. Cybersecurity is an example of that, because you find it across the stack. We also have a section on quantum that is placed at several places in the stack. We have a section on international cooperation that relates to several elements of the stack. So cybersecurity is definitely also described in the Eurostack, but in view of time, we didn't do an extensive presentation on that. And there are also a number of concrete suggestions related to cybersecurity. So one of that is related to the question that someone has about European startups disappearing to the United States. Well, one of the points that is made in the report, we have to make the case for investment in cybersecurity in Europe. And that case is not sufficiently made. So although we have very good cybersecurity laws, we have very interesting developments, great startups, a clearer case has to be made to the investment community that cybersecurity startups and growth companies in Europe are really interesting to invest to. And both Francesca and I are talking to investment firms, to venture capital firms, and they actually start seeing the opportunity of Europe. You know, they say explicitly, Europe becomes really interesting. So this is the moment in time, as Francesca says. There are other things that you can do. I think that the colleagues in the Commission may want to think about it. You know, it will be a challenge, but we need to crack that challenge to tie public procurement to greater digital autonomy. But cybersecurity may be precisely one of the reasons, because cybersecurity is so close to the critical capabilities that you need to have in order to defend your sovereignty. And so that may actually be an argument to say we do a real solid, strict back-to-back between perhaps great investments that we do in innovation and in research and public procurement. So no joking around. If we do quantum security, we invest in R&D, and in my personal view, we should have an obligation of governments to buy European quantum security because of the reasons that I just said. So I think that really is about an integrated, synergistic policy that you can do. And the section on cybersecurity talks about a number of these kind of points, just to make the point.
Yeah, and maybe if I may just add one point, because this sovereignty consideration in the investment part, but are critical, and we haven't done enough, I think, in the past. But now it becomes clear that we are one executive order away from losing control and access to critical technologies for our industrial base. So this becomes all of a sudden very urgent, and we have to do it. But I wanted also to add, because sometimes we're told, okay, so the Eurostack may be a kind of like, again, a kind of bureaucratic, you know, top down, like large consortia, things are happening too slow. No, we actually do see these very differently. And that's why we were proposing a 10 billion Eurostack fund, which is addressed to, you know, the innovators and the kind of European tech champions. But we also, importantly, now that we have all this talent that can come actually from, for example, the US into Europe, we see very important to create these hubs for interdisciplinary research. And the deep tech community in Europe, which is very, very strong with our research centers and capabilities, to have spaces, hubs, really AI labs, hubs where innovation can happen in a non-bureaucratic way. And I mean, there are member states that now are prototyping, for example, sandboxes for AI innovation, all kinds of regulatory enabler, I would say, of innovation. And I think this is also going to be the European way, because again, we are not going to just mimic Silicon Valley model, not for concentration of power, but also not because we don't have these huge, you know, companies that are building all the stack. I mean, in effect, you know, Elon Musk is building the Elon stack. We know that from ground to up. We don't have this competence in Europe. So we're going to have to come up with a more decentralized, federated, let's say, a diverse approach, but with precision and scale, and with the capacity to really grow the European market, which is, by the way, the digital single market. So it really goes hand in hand.
Thank you so much. As we have 6 minutes left, I will just direct 2 questions to close the meeting to you both. Maybe you can pick one of them, or you know, even both, if you can be brief. So one comes from Paul, who asks you to comment on ideas, suggestions on the business model aspects of the OSS to enable the Eurostack strategy, including any IPR related considerations. And then one question that has come up is about the other several Eurostack initiatives. For instance, one is prioritizing solutions from the private sector, defends the French view on cloud security. Another one is a 300 billion industrial project. So the participant is asking whether you can explain how the one that you've presented today is different from these others.
Maybe I can take this one. I'm not sure I'm understanding. I think there is one Eurostack initiative, and of course, being one Eurostack initiative in a continent of 500 million people, there is a diversity of inputs and diversity of proposal. So, for example, I was saying before that one focus could be next, moving forward, understanding how the procurement by European procurement should happen at different parts of the stack, or how to link the Euro stack with the AI factories or gigafactories. I mean, this will be an input. On another side, we have seen how 200 companies have been joining the initiative, and of course proposing a tailored approach to their view of what the different companies. There is the European SMEs Alliance, which of course looks at what is the place of digital SMEs in this. So the research centers, of course, are doing something else. So it seems to me obvious that this will require inputs which are different according to the focus, and actually focus will be critical if we want to transform this framework and this proposition, which is an encompassing digital industrial policy, into something actionable. And I didn't mention, of course, that we are very close in contact with member states, some of which the Commission has already mentioned, for example, the Digital Commons EDIC or the open source initiatives that are happening. And of course, member states have different views and priorities, but of course they need to work with industries and research and all of the citizens to make it work. So I mean, it's complex effort, and that's why actually embracing that can only sit in the European strategy. I mean, this can only be a fully European project and only happen if the European Commission, the European Union, of course, sees this as a priority. I don't know if, Paul, do you want to add anything on this?
Well, perhaps I go immediately to the second question and generalize a little bit from this. So first of all, many thanks to the participants here for the questions, because that's really great. And I would also say, send suggestions, because don't believe that, we have all the answers to the questions. So the question, for example, about what else can you do beyond traditional open source business models that would help, in particular in the European situation, the development of the open source ecosystem. Very interested to hear about it. That also holds for some of the other questions here. Think along, so provide suggestions, and above all, we don't really need to have that much more analysis. We need to have action now. So if you send an idea, also ask yourself, what is it that you can do? Are you able to contribute, for example, to trying out these other ideas for business models around open source? Are you able to make the case to your government for doing public procurement that is much more focused on reinforcing our sovereignty, etc., etc.? So I would say see this as something, and that's also the answer to the lot of writing that you see around Eurostack. Think along. There are lots of people that are thinking along. Eurostack is perhaps more even a movement than just a single document. And there are several ideas coming on the table that now will move us from the analysis into action, and action is urgent.
Well, thank you very much to you and to our colleagues who also contributed to the discussion today. And thank you also for the invitation to continue the discussion, to move beyond the analysis. Indeed, some might argue that speech can be performative, but words don't always produce actions. So, and in this case, we're definitely seeing a chorus of experts like you, policymakers and industry leaders rallying around the Eurostack initiative. So there's a clear case also to be made for such a pragmatic approach. So thank you so much once again. I hope this is not the last time that we'll have the pleasure to welcome you at DigiConnect for this discussion and others, and many others. So thank you for the richness of your contributions. And as we approach the third edition of the State of the Digital Decade report, a little advertisement for our own unit here, we're happy to see that this workshop possibly has contributed to the debate. We'd like to thank you all participants for the many questions we've received on Slido. And we encourage you to remain involved with the Fusurium community and of course to continue share and your insights and proposals. We will aim to continue organize such webinars after the summer as far as our unit is concerned. We'll be looking forward to stay in touch, and please in the meantime stay tuned because the release of our Digital Decade report is about a month away from now. So looking forward to continue the discussion. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you to our speakers today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.